Brighter Morning with Bo. And I'm Bo Tiwari, your host. We were talking just now to Dr. Roger Hussain, Senior Economist at the University of the West Indies, Mr. Neeraj Tiwari, Chief Executive Officer of the American Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Larry Hawaii, a financial consultant, now and former Minister of Finance. They had very interesting perspectives on the budget. Dr. Roger Hussain was very worried about the assumptions in the budget about the price of oil and gas, and also the heavy dependence on oil and gas revenues in order to do what the budget sets out to do. Mr. Neeraj Tiwari gave the Minister of Finance the benefit of the doubt, although he had a fair amount of skepticism, and he took a wait-and-see attitude to see if the basic things that need to be done to facilitate the working of some of the incentive measures in the budget actually comes to pass. And Mr. Larry Hawaii had some credibility issues on implementation and moving from talk to action. And he was very concerned about the growing deficit, which at the present rate of growth could take the total deficit up to $50 to $60 billion by the end of 2022 as we enter the 2022-23 budget cycle. Okay, so that is the position. Do we have any of our guests on the line? Okay, could we start? Who do we? Right. Oh, we have all three. Okay. How are you doing? Could I start with you, Vivek? Good morning to you. Vanus, good morning to you. Kriss, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What about former Minister Charran Tesheira? Could we make sure we get the link and see if we can talk to her, please? We miss Marlene Atz because she was on her way to the chamber to speak and could not make the connection as she stopped in the car to connect with us. So let's start with you, Vivek, because there was a lot. Good morning, Charran. Good morning.
Good morning, Bo. I'm not too late.
All right, that's okay. All right, let's start with Vivek because there was a lot said in the budget about small and medium enterprises. So let's start with your take first.
Good morning to the other panelists.
Lift the volume, please.
Yes, it was quite interesting. I think for the first time I felt in the budget, SMEs were sort of singled out, and there were some good things, actually, I have to say, that were said. He spoke about a $30 million grant. Interestingly enough, he said about over 2,000 something people accessed this grant. At $28.5 million was granted to people. That isn't exactly what we've been hearing on the ground, but it would be good if some of these people who have accessed the grant, that if it's not a confidentiality issue, that they can come out and talk about their experience, about how they accessed the grant, what they accessed the grant for, and that could help other people and build some confidence in that particular grant and probably bring more people to access the funds, because we had a problem before with accessing the funds. Interestingly enough as well, too, the $100 million to facilitate the revitalization, or he spoke about the 100% guarantee for that $100 million. This is a key point here because they actually listened to what it is we and many chambers were saying, which was it was difficult to access because of the what the audited statements and so on. And the Minister of Finance actually said, we will sort of give a asylum or whatever to what happened before. Once you can access the grant, and once before the grant is disbursed, we really want you to come up to date with your payments for 2019 and 2020. And I find that as a good compromise, and that's a good working relationship and a good bridge between business and government that came out in that point. And I hope that more people, more businesses that are struggling right now will be able to access that $100 million grant. In addition to that, we spoke about Forex, which was, he was saying we have 8.7 months import cover. If we look at the needs of small and medium business, particularly the retail sector, as they reopen the economy, and he did give a commitment to living with COVID and reopening the economy moving forward, then that 8.7 months of import cover is, quite important to us, particularly when he says as well that all taxes and so on will be removed from electric vehicles. Obviously, if you're removing the taxes from electric vehicles, there is going to be a push from, car vehicle sales and car distributorships to go and purchase vehicles and so on to take advantage of this and sell to the public and all of that. So you will find that as we reopen and as things get moving in 2022, that additional Forex is actually going to be, we're going to be looking at how that is distributed among, whether we feel it's been distributed equitably and so on. In addition to that, another important thing he spoke about was outstanding wage negotiations and regularizing the employment of nurses. Now, why is that important? Because we're looking for some sort of injection or some sort of stimulus. Now, we understand all the tax breaks that have been given on various levels, 5% for manufacturing, 5% for if you're an exporter and so on. They also spoke about 5 years if it is your SME and you're listed on the stock exchange, which is not for everybody, obviously. That would be for SMEs that have a certain annual revenue stream that is robust enough to say, well, they can pay out dividends, and then becoming part of the, being listed on the stock exchange will come with its own rules and regulations. And that's why it was a good thing to have that facility there to help guide SMEs that want to take, that next step to guide them along those lines. But let's talk about the wage negotiations. What we're looking at here is, he spoke about VAT refunds, which would have been good for businesses and so on, but he also spoke about income tax refunds. The income tax refunds that would have been given in 2020, let's say 2019, wouldn't have given people, increase their disposable income as much as maybe, depending on what they were given, help them negotiate through and that process of, struggle and during the COVID lockdown and during that COVID pandemic time, which we're still in, but it was, a bit worse last year. However, if it is that these outstanding wage negotiations in 2022 take place and they can reach some settlement, that means that a lot of back pay could be issued. And that back pay would mean that a lot of money, some money goes into the pockets of a large amount of workers and employees and so on. And we feel that on the ground, that would be a good, stimulus to come out and increase commercial activity as people's disposable income increases. Same thing with the regularization of nurses' contracts, because what happens is people who are on month-to-month contracts, obviously they can't access finance in any form. It's difficult to go to any of the higher purchase places or go to the bank and say, I want a loan and so on. When you only have a 3-month recurring contract, it's not going to happen. So if it is that, people along that line, nurses and so on, are able to have more security of tenure for a longer period of time, and that also means that they can go to the banks and access loans or whatever, that could also, increase, again, their disposable income. It could give them the confidence to come out and spend. It can give them the confidence to do the things that they wanted to do, and it can increase perhaps on a certain, the level of commercial activity a bit. He also spoke about relaxing the know your client or know your customer regulations in the bank so that more people can come and open bank accounts. I think that's important because one of the problems with accessing the grants that the government gave, the social grants, was that it was difficult for people who didn't have bank accounts. And that's good. But what we also know in small business is the issues with opening commercial accounts. And if we're having that conversation about how to bring people from the informal sector into the formal sector, if we're having that conversation about, okay, for most people in the informal sector, you're going to come out as a sole trader, or you're going to come out on a very limited. When you form your company, you're going to form it in a way that, you're not paying, you don't have employees, you're not, it's not very technical. It's a very simple company that you're forming. But what we're hearing is that it's very difficult to get those commercial bank accounts. And if you can't get the commercial bank account, even if you're forming your simple company from the informal and you want to get into the formal sector, then that is a huge stumbling block in itself. So any assistance or any direction to the banks to say, also relax it or also, allow people to open these commercial accounts, because the bank is also saying no commingling. So, opening the commercial accounts is a good step forward into bringing people from that informal sector into the formal sector, and also to assist the bank, the rules and regulations that surround things like commingling of funds and so on, and particularly with very small businesses and micro businesses.
All right, Vivek, thank you very, very much for that broad perspective on the small and medium business sector. I want to move now to Dr. James Vanus, James, and get perhaps a macro response to the budget, and then perhaps a response from the Tobago side.
Well, on the budget as a whole, I guess the place to start is with the fact that we are ending up with a 9 billion plus deficit.
Yes.
And we're incurring that deficit and funding it with loans that will cost us about 4.5% of the dollar. So, of the dollar borrowed. So that we ought to have in the same budget that admits to that deficit, clarity on what, after we get past COVID, what we plan to do to grow productivity and grow the economy at a rate that is above this 4.5%. And I saw nothing in the budget that gives me reassurance that the government is clear on that at all. And it in many ways is the most important thing if you're going to run into this continuous borrowing to cope with COVID, as you should. Now, the absence of clarity on it is evident in the way the government anticipates growth and transformation. It anticipates growth and transformation from agriculture, which is not likely to deliver that kind of growth rate, manufacturing, which is also not likely to deliver that kind of growth rate, and digitization, which also will not deliver that kind of growth rate. So where will the growth come from? What the government fails to understand here is what is the engine of growth in economies like these, in the Charran and Tobago economy in particular. And there is no sign in this budget that there is clarity in the Ministry of Finance or in the government as a whole on what kind of growth engine Trinidad and Tobago can admit. So this was a macro concern. Now, from the perspective of Tobago, what the government proposed is to rely on tourism and what they call hospitality, infrastructure, and energy saving measures in order to stimulate the Tobago economy. Well, there is no serious tourism sector in Tobago, and a season and sand tourism sector in Tobago can't carry us, either Tobago or the nation, very far in terms of either the growth you want to achieve, evident by the experience of bigger countries in the region like Jamaica, and smaller economies like St. Lucia and so on. You're nowhere near the 5 and 6% growth rate that you're going to want to deal with the debt if you're relying simply on reactivating tourism and hospitality in Tobago. So there again is evidence that the government does not understand what is required to develop a Tobago economy and grapple with Tobago's historical 137 years development problem, and what it must do to exploit Tobago's capacity to facilitate national diversification and development and growth. So this entire budget was quite a disappointment to me. The minister is the same. It's the last year's budget warmed over with new figures, And it's clear the government has not learned any lesson. Maybe the final point I should make to you is that the most worrying statement in this entire budget to me was the government's indication that the two very dangerous bills to colonize Tobago are still alive in the parliament. And the minister was willing to appeal to the opposition to pass those bills. Most Tobagonians I know want the opposition to block those bills. So you see, we're on different pages with respect to Tobago, with the people of Tobago and this budget.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vanus, for that very clear perspective. I wonder if I could go to Kriss and talk. I mean, there was a lot of talk in the budget about getting SMEs, for instance, to go on the stock exchange to vitalize, I might say this, the financial markets, but also to create the conditions for participation and equity participation in the small business. What is your perspective on this? And you are free to say anything else on any other aspect on the budget, but I just zeroed in on that because of your interest.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Charran. Again, good morning to my fellow panelists. I was actually encouraged by what was spoken to with respect to the SMEs. There are some opportunities that presented themselves in the articulation of the budget yesterday. For example, I mean, let's start with the fairly obvious ones. There are continued incentives to go to the stock market, and there is an allocation of 50 billion for advisory services associated with SMEs. That's an opportunity because, as you know, in the private equity environment that we've been speaking to, a key part of assisting SMEs from a private equity standpoint is that advisory dimension to what is done for private equity practitioners and for investing companies. So the continuation of the discussion along the incentives and, of course, what was articulated yesterday with respect to even more attractive incentives for SMEs for listing was encouraging. Tied into that is the opportunity for stock market investing that came with the announcement or the intention of the merger into the TTMB entity, as well as the APO for citizens. So we're speaking about stock market activity. The immediate ones are the last two I just mentioned. And of course, if we get this right, which I believe we will see more listings on the junior stock exchange. It's very important to mention at this stage that an opportunity that continues to present itself in the articulation of the national budget is the conversation around monetary policy and money supply. Monetary policy in the Trinidad and Tobago context has a lot more relevance and impact on the non-energy sector in that it speaks to commercial bank credit, it speaks to liquidity conditions, it speaks to the resources, the financial resources that will become available with buoyant monetary conditions. And it's a huge opportunity to complement what was said on the fiscal side of things, in that while we have the intention to bring these incentives and these initiatives to the fore on the SME side, on the other side, on the money supply side, we have that opportunity where it is monetary conditions can support these activities. And it is not only confined to the SME conversation, it also speaks to what is happening in the retail and the individual side of things in terms of money supply. We are seeing the removal of VAT on significantly what we consider the consumer staples, the goods of necessity. And simultaneous with that is an opportunity to bring down personal income taxes while looking at the indirect VAT and potentially carrying it back up, because what you're doing, you're actually putting more disposable income into the average spender's hands and giving them the opportunity to choose to spend on discretionary items that continue to attract VAT. And we may even see the more discretionary, the higher the VAT. So for the last 10 to 15 years or even beyond that, VAT has been on average at a 15% level. It went up to 17.5 in one instance. I think it's back down to 12 now on average. And there is room. And again, this is really where fiscal and monetary policy can have a good marriage in respect to what is being done in Trinidad and Tobago. If you look at the wider international community, monetary policy is what is saving the international economies. And there's absolutely no reason why it is we can't import their learnings, create our own version of what our monetary policy package should look like to complement fiscal policy. So if you were to take those considerations, the incentives for the SME, the silent opportunity for private equity advisors to support these SMEs, the introduction of new listings in the form of the APO, well, not one new listing, and of course the APO for first citizens. There are opportunities that are being presented, and I think it's very important for us to look for these opportunities. One of the things that caught my attention is the conversation we've been having about the levels of debt in Trinidad and Tobago. And from a macro perspective, from a debt management perspective, we tend to speak to total debt to GDP. But it's important for us to look at our external debt and then, of course, the local debt and exactly understand what does the external debt component mean for our foreign resources position, our reserves, the HSF, and of course, our ability to earn US dollars. Our current external debt to GDP is somewhere in the vicinity of 21%. And if memory serves, for the last 10 to 15 years, it would have been hovering anywhere between that 18 to 20% external debt to GDP. And while we are concerned about the foreign reserves, and naturally because of the multiple macroeconomic shocks we have experienced over the last 10 years, in these circumstances, there would be a natural reduction in the reserve positions. That being said, a 7 to 8 import cover, 8-month import cover is manageable. And to the extent that we are looking at our debt management strategy, the external debt is not at a worrying level, taken into consideration where it has been for the last 5 to 10 years. The external debt, the local debt, which is pretty much what will speak to our deficit financing in regard to how we finance that over the next fiscal, really comes to how do we treat with this debt from a debt management perspective, as well as how do we incorporate the capital market. Right now, system liquidity in the banks are some in the vicinity of 8.4 billion, and we have a deficit projection, I think 9.06, if my memory serves from yesterday's reading. And of course, we have, as part of that solution, the divestment of part of First Citizens' shares. There are tools that governments and the government has at its disposal, accessing the capital market, the sale of assets, and last, but only in a worst case scenario where it is we will actually tap into the reserves. And I'm not in any way at all saying that this is what we should do, but I'm saying that these are all tools, and at this point we have opportunities to treat with the deficit from two perspectives. The capital market gives us the opportunity here, and we have assets that the government has available to divest. So I see a lot of opportunities in the budget being read. I mean, we understand our fiscal position, we understand the vulnerabilities we have associated with our energy sector. And let's speak about that for a second.
Right.
We were speaking about...
Let's stop there, Kriss, and we go to former Minister of Finance, Charran. Is she on? Is she off?
Yes, I'm here.
Morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
To see you, Ms. Tesheira, and well, Charran, we know each other a long time, so.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get your initial perspective on the budget read yesterday. A lot in it, really, and I would ask you, please, to give your initial response. You heard your
Well, I
three
just want
points.
to, two things I just want to mention before I give my overall response as a former Minister of Finance, because that's just how I'm going to look at the budget, not in, small groups, but the overall effect.
Yeah, macro.
Yes, I'm pleased that they have included the small and medium enterprises, but what I was doing while we were talking was confirming that the definition of a small enterprise is an enterprise that employs up to 25 people and whose gross stake is 5 million, whereas a medium is 10 million people, $10 million a year, and employing 25 to 50 people. So who are the persons that have been left off are the micro enterprises that do not fall within that category. So I think what the budget needed to address was that it also to look at the micro enterprises, because those are the ones that the opportunities are very limited. That's number one. Number two, with regard to foreign exchange, I just want to remind everyone that when we speak about how much months of cover we have on our foreign exchange, just not so long ago in 2014, I think we had 11 billion US dollars, and I think that was earned from exports. Up to just about June of this year, we had 6.64 billion, and that's about 5 billion reduction. But what is very telling is what even made it reach to now 7.1 billion, as the minister said, is because of the special drawing rights from the IMF, which gave us 644 US million dollars, the 1.2 billion, I think, that was drawn down from the HSF, and the 500 million that was bond issues. So a lot of what is looked at as our foreign exchange reserves is really not our foreign exchange reserves, because if we took that out, we can really understand what our position is regarding exports and our ability to earn. So that's my general comment. My other comment is generally that I felt a bit disappointed in that I felt that this was an opportunity for the government. I don't want to use the word diversified, but the opportunities with food. We import 80% of our food, 11% of our imports come from food. The highest impact in inflation is by 50% is food. So you can talk about discretion, and I'm glad they removed a lot of the VAT from a lot of items that would not probably be said to be essential, but still I was glad to see that. But I think the government has to do far more than it's saying it's going to be doing to deal with the issue of food, its security, and I think that in the allocation of $1.2 billion is consistent with the allocations in previous years, so I'm not very hopeful. Another area was tourism, and the Minister of Finance was all over the place with that. He said we should do some eco, then we should do some sports, and we should do some cultural, then we should do, I don't know if there's any tourism he didn't leave out, but I think it needed to be more a comparative advantage, and we don't have time to speak about it, but I think cultural tourism is an excellent opportunity to have economic inclusion. Finally, what I would say is that it is clear, at least to me, that the budget is depending on the natural gas. And it's not unreasonable. Natural gas has been going between $5 and $6. He pegged it at $3.50 something, which was a conservative position to take. With regard to oil also has been going even $70, $75, and he took a fairly reasonable position with regard to that. But what I was very disappointed, there was no mention, if you noticed, about Baracara, the petroleum refinery. So that looks as though that's not a consideration again. So forget about that. But I think that the government intends to put all its eggs in the basket of energy and downstream. And I think that's a quite unfortunate position for them to have taken. So that is my essential. I could go on other issues.
Yes.
The one that bothers me most, if we have the time, and maybe we don't, but with the private-public partnership, I have real concerns given the legislation that we have, the procurement legislation, the gambling legislation. But if we have the time, I can come back to that.
All right, very good. We will come back, and when we come back, we'll come back with four of you on the screen, and we will have a conversation. But right now, I want to break so that we can have some commercials for our sponsors. And thank you very much, and thank you for staying with Brighter Morning with Bo.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
You did the right thing. So now we're giving you things. Republic Bank thanks you and wants to reward you for getting vaxxed. Win $5,000 in prizes every week, plus one of 2 cars in December. You took care of your health, and now we're taking care of you. $5,000 and a chance to win a car. See press and log on to republictt.com for details.
Mangalese Trading Company Limited, specialist in PVC ceiling, gypsum ceiling, suspended ceilings, medallions, lights, metal framings, and SPCS flooring, known as vinyl plank. Now introducing Mangalese Foods, wholesale and retail, distributor of the family brand of food items. Our range of products include rice, sugar, chickpeas, split peas, and soybean oil. Mangalese Foods deliver exceptional products. We offer timely and efficient service. We are located at 9 Francis Lala Road, Charlieville, Chaguanas. Contact us at 672-9889, 740-5569, or 336-4373. Mangalese Trading Company Limited.
Your house is more than just a home. It's the new normal. It's your place of work, your kids' school, and even your gym. It's where you and your family spend most of your time. With over 43 years in the building service industry, let Magic Mist Services Limited take care of your home cleaning and maintenance needs. From ceiling to floor, interior and exterior, allowing you to focus on what matters most to you. Give us a call. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari, and this is MCTV, Multicultural TV. We have 4 really formidable guests with us this morning. We had 3 earlier, just as formidable. And they are Vivek Charran from the regional chambers, small chambers in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Vanus James, an economist in his own right. Mr. Kriss, I forget your last name.
Marcus.
Kriss Marcus, sorry. And who is in the equity, private equity business. And Ms. Karen Tesheira, who is an attorney at law and former Minister of Finance. Now, you all made some formidable contributions there. I thought, Vivek, you talked about you were pleased that the minister took the SME sector seriously and spoke to some of the issues there, even though you were not sure how they would all work out and impact. Then the Vanus, you talked about you basically felt that the minister had missed the macroeconomic boat. He had missed the Tobago boat, and that there was a political stalemate that he was more than optimistic about, that it could not be ignored. Kriss, you mentioned the fact that you saw opportunity in private equity, you saw opportunity in the First Citizens, you saw opportunity in terms of taxation measures, and you saw some, what can I say, some space for better strategizing and collaborative policy making between fiscal and monetary policy. And Karen, you talked about, again, something that Roger Hussein mentioned this morning, that there seemed to be a more than reasonable dependence on natural gas, and you talked about the macroeconomic strategy not being coherent and synergized enough for you to see the impact that it would have on the economy, and you felt that they left out micro business in the equation. So if I said anything that you feel I misinterpreted you, please correct it. And I will go on now to talk. Karen, I will start with you this time to continue. If you want to elaborate on anything that you feel it is important for the country to understand coming out of the budget read yesterday.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Bo. I think I made the point that there was not any real transformational perspective on the budget, which I think many of us expected, that with all the talk about food security and the need to look for other measures because of the volatility of the energy sector, regardless of whether it's doing well now, we know it goes up and down, and we don't want to have situations that puts us in this position as many other countries have. What I wanted to say is this, that in terms of the private-public partnership, I am not against it at all. I mean, that is where the world goes, and that is the opportunity. But what I am very concerned about, and I probably say this so often, but it is important to say that, is that unless you have an independent regulator who has oversight over these contracts which the government enters into on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is, and this is the OECD, it's not Charran, Tesheira, it's FATF, every other organization, even in the legislation itself, it is an opportunity for corruption, it's an opportunity for bribery. So what I am saying to you is that it is absolutely necessary, if we are going forward with the private-public partnership arrangement, with which I have no issue, that we incorporate the small and medium businesses to be part of that, because what we are doing is that only the large and the powerful in our community can really benefit from those contracts. And what it does, and I can use two examples before I conclude on that, is one, we saw this fiasco with the HEC contractor, Chinese company that was blacklisted by the World Bank. And when it came out in the public domain, they had to scuttle it. Now, if they had the regulator in place, that would not have happened. We've also seen that the Belt to Road initiative of the Chinese government with regard to the building of the ENR International Airport, or rebuilding or restructuring, where the Mr. Vanus can, not saying his last name, can confirm this, James, that they do no feasibility studies, no sustainability studies like the development banks would require, and the size of the airport is far exceeds any medium or short-term requirement of that airport. So my point is this: I would have liked to have seen more with agriculture in particular. I'll just say this shortly. In agriculture in particular, we have always said we don't have the space, but I've used this opportunity and spoken on it. Holland, which is 252 times smaller than America, the size of Maryland, is the second largest global supplier of food in the world, exporting over between 90 to 100 million dollars in food. So I don't think that research, development, and innovation should drive the agricultural sector, and opportunities should be given to the micro, small, and medium enterprise in order to ensure economic inclusion.
Okay, I will take two things from you that need to be emphasized. One is the procurement legislation and the oversight system, and the inclusion in the procurement process of small and medium enterprises. The procurement legislation actually makes mention of the need for this kind of developmental approach in procurement. But there have been so many adjustments to the procurement legislation since 2015. I don't know ultimately with the regulations what we're going to end up with. And then finally, the agriculture focus, which we should have in order to deal with the issue of food supply and ultimately food security. Vanus, I want to go to you. One of the things I'm always find kind of thing. You know, like when you deal with SMEs in Trinidad and Tobago, or you deal with any sector in Trinidad and Tobago, you do it through the banks or the credit unions. But when you do it in Tobago, all the money is sent to the House of Assembly. I find that a little problematic. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, because of the absence of an appropriate institutional framework on which we could build a Tobago economy. Once we have the framework we have now, with government as the only significant institution, that's where that really is where you have to funnel funds. We live in Tobago by bringing money to the THA, and then the THA distributes that. And that's what we want to change fundamentally. We want to build a viable private sector in which can attract resources on the basis of a sound development program. It's the absence of that is my most fundamental concern with this budget. Because what I think the country has to understand is that everything you try to do in Trinidad or Tobago is import dependent. You want to do agriculture, you're going to find out that it is import dependent. You want to do manufacturing, the same thing. Digitization is a prescription for imports. And the real question that raises is, where do we get the exports from in order to pay for them? Consumption growth, investment growth, government spending growth, debt, all of them are import dependent. And we have to answer the export diversification question. We can't continue to depend on oil and gas because we know the experience with that, the volatility and so on. And really what the country needs to understand is that the proper answer to the question of how you diversify your exports is that you have to change from dependence on oil and gas to the production capital exports. That's education exports, which the minister didn't even bother to mention that. Healthcare exports, which he mentioned primarily by talking about medical tourism. Yeah. You have to recalibrate the creative industries and sports and so on properly on sound bases. And of course, you have to rethink what you're doing, how those things are tied to your housing stock development. Right, and Vanus, none of that shows up.
We really have come to the end of the program. I mean, I know with this group, given what you know and what you can do and say and how you can basically speak to the issues, we can go on for a few hours. I will just quickly, just one sentence from Vivek and one sentence from Kriss Marcus. Please.
I completely agree with what Mr. Tesheira said about micro businesses and how vulnerable they are and whether the facilities in the budget will actually reach to them. I have to say that the survival of the SME sector and SME entrepreneurship, which is huge, depends actually upon the growth. It depends upon jobs. It depends upon people's disposable income. And we are still in a situation, even though I remain optimistic, we are still in a situation where the majority of sectors are not open at 100%, or things like events and so on are not operating at all. And we really need to exit this pandemic, and people need to continue to make the right personal choices.
Kriss, a shorter sentence to close.
I agree. I agreed with Mr. Tesheira with respect to the conservatism of the budget. I agree with Dr. James in respect to the over-reliance on the energy sector. And I can conclude by saying that a greater integration of the financial services sector, which is the backbone, sturdy yet flexible, integrating from a monetary policy standpoint. If you can get more involvement of monetary policy on fiscal and money supply conditions improvements, I think we will have a much better story to tell next year.
All right. Well, thank you very much for contributing. You were all great, all 7 of you who spoke this morning. And I want to thank you for watching on MCTV. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. We will try to interrogate some of these issues more deeply with each of you. If you will agree, I will have you on one-to-one so that we can talk for about half an hour, because there is so much to talk about and so much that you can add in value. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for listening and watching. This is Bo Tiwari, Brighter Morning with Bo, signing off for the 8 o'clock news.